In an idyllic future, pretty white kids have their lives interrupted by an invasion of giant bug aliens from outer space. Would you like to know more? A classic science fiction novel is turned into a ham-fisted satire that completely misses the point, spawning 2 crappy sequels. Would you like to know more? Starship Troopers, the literary work, was written by Robert Heinlein in 1959 and originally published as a serial in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction before being released as its own novel. And this story is really a vehicle for Robert Heinlein to explore some ideas and concepts for future society's development in politics and warfare. Starship Troopers, the movie, was released in 1997 and directed by Paul Verhoeven, the same guy who gave us RoboCop and Total Recall, but also gave us Showgirls. And Paul Verhoeven's vision is not one that's exploring new ideas, but instead is satirizing existing ones, in particular fascism and militarism. And I'm not saying that this movie is a complete and utter disaster, because it's not. This movie does have its good qualities, one being the special effects, which are a good blend of CGI and practical effects, and still hold up today. Second is the cast. If not overly talented, they are pretty to look at. Apparently the future is entirely populated with pretty people. And Jake Busey's teeth. But Casper Van Dien's chin is ridiculously well chiseled. To celebrate, we get a gratuitous shower scene. Black box is optional. And speaking of the cast, am I the only one who noticed that the 2 major military role models in this movie, Sergeant Zim and Lieutenant Razak, are both played by the villains from the Highlander films? However, despite its good qualities, Starship Troopers does shoot wide of the mark. And while a lot of people just think that Starship Troopers is a bad movie, that's not actually what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Starship Troopers is a bad Starship Troopers movie. That'll make sense here in a minute. Trust me. Now, since the novel was the basis for the movie, the director decided he wanted his cast to read it before they started shooting, which is a good idea. Unfortunately, you know what Paul Verhoeven didn't do before shooting his movie? He didn't read the book. Now, apparently he got a couple chapters in and found he was bored and depressed. Now, I'm not a Hollywood producer, but I think if my director found the source material boring and depressing, I might start looking to go in a different direction. Undaunted and unafraid, Verhoeven decided he'd take what he had, rip the guts out of it, and turn what was a thoughtful discussion into a clownish satire. Now, all the Nazi references are pretty ham-fisted, they're not hard to spot. And since it's been overdone, I just don't think it'd be classy to do a bunch of Nazi jokes. Oh, who are we kidding? I'm going to do some Nazi jokes. How about, Heil, Patrick Harris. Or, Harold and Kumar, Escape from Castle Wolfenstein. Doogie Himmler, SS. My personal favorite, How I Met the Fuhrer. Okay, now that that's out of my system, let's get back on track. With Starship Troopers, we actually have pretty poor source material for making a satire, particularly about fascism, because even if you want to paint the Federation as a bunch of morons, we're left with the choice of either we cheer for the morons or we cheer for the giant bug aliens. And humanity is actually on pretty solid footing for waging war against these guys. And this is the thing that is either completely unintentional or intentional and completely genius about this movie. Because even though we're satirizing the fascists, we still end up cheering for them to win? That's kind of crazy. I'd like to give Mr. Verhoeven the benefit of the doubt here. However, it just doesn't make up for some of the numerous shortcomings. And this is just that in the transition from novel to movie, we get big variation in theme. In the novel, we spend most of our time in debates on philosophy and morality of politics and warfare. In the movie, we spend most of our time wondering about the personal lives of the main characters. To start off with, we have Johnny and Carmen. And Johnny and Carmen are high school sweethearts. And we can see that Johnny really loves Carmen. And while she definitely returns his affections, we also get the sense that it's not quite as deep for her as it is for him. Into this mix we add Dizzy. Now, Dizzy has a serious Jones for Johnny, and despite how hard she pursues him, he only has eyes for Carmen and remains faithful. But along comes this guy named Xander. Xander has a problem with flirting with other guys' girlfriends, and we can see that he's clearly got his eye on Carmen. So the four of them end up going off for their respective military training, either boot camp or flight school, and it takes Carmen all of about 5 seconds to Dear John, Johnny, uber bitch. And this is where things stand when the war breaks out. Now, Dizzy and Johnny end up in the same unit, and it takes a little while, but he finds he's got feelings for her. At least enough for a little sleeping bag snuggle. And they're not necessarily alone in this. While it's never explicitly stated, we get the feeling that there's something going on between Xander and Carmen. I mean, you gotta fill all those late night hours on the bridge some way, don't you? However, shortly after Johnny and Dizzy hook up, Dizzy gets killed on a mission, and believe me, her death is the real tragedy of this movie. But she's not alone, because shortly afterwards, Xander buys his own real estate deal as well. And in the end, we have Johnny and Carmen being brought together quite literally by Carl, and we're left wondering, are they going to get back together? Of course, what I'm actually wondering is, why the hell is all this bullshit in the middle of my war movie? What is this, some sort of episode of fucking 90210? I wanted to watch the mobile infantry, a bunch of guys with testosterone and heavy weapons laying waste to a bunch of giant bug aliens. You know, every time somebody tries to inject a love story into what is a war story, part of my soul dies. Happy place, go to a happy place. Okay, so it's not the addition of all this interpersonal drama that causes Starship Troopers the movie to suck. No, what really cuts the legs out here is that in order to put all that drama in, they had to cut out all the philosophy from the book that was really fun to chew on. You see, Heinlein graduated from Annapolis. He spent a number of years as a naval officer, so his military viewpoint is very grounded, and he's got a deep respect for the military. Verhoeven, on the other hand, does not. His story is a satire of the military, which is portrayed as a bunch of thuggish buffoons. Nowhere is this more evident than early on in their basic training, when the recruits are being taught how to throw knives. And Ace complains because what use is a knife when all your enemy has to do is push a button and launch a nuclear rocket. Zim's response is to pin Ace's hand to the wall from 20 feet away, and then exclaim, "The enemy cannot push a button if you disable his hand." Now, while this scene does appear in Heinlein's novel, minus the impalement, it illustrates the point that basic training is not about teaching recruits how to use weapons, it is about teaching recruits on how to become weapons. For the full argument, go ahead and read the book, it's much better. And throughout the rest of the movie, we're shown an army that is just wildly incompetent. They're armed with assault rifles that have an effective range of about 10 feet. We know this because they can stand in a circle 50 meters wide, firing blindly inwards and not hit the guys on the other side. Their main strategy seems to be handing these weapons to a bunch of teenagers who run around with their hair on fire shooting at anything that moves. And they forget such concepts like armor, or heavy artillery, or close air support. Although there is that one bombing run scene, but that seems more of an aberration than anything else. And this is why, as a movie, Starship Troopers gets a failing grade. It is so far divorced from the source material as to be something completely different. I don't criticize Paul Verhoeven for having different ideas, but what he's in effect done is having rewritten another artist's work simply because he disagreed with it. And that's just tacky and rude. Fans of the original novel were probably asking the same question I was at the end of this movie, which was, what the hell was that? Aside from the names and the giant bug aliens, it was not what we were expecting. Which is not to say it wasn't fun, because it is. It's got its good moments. But there were times you also feel strangely violated. The good news is there is a Starship Troopers reboot in the works, one that is supposed to be more faithful to the original novel. At least we're supposed to get the power armor we've been waiting for. But given the current state of Hollywood, perhaps it's just wiser to expect another flogging on its way. However, it's not like there's another beloved sci-fi novel out there in danger of being ruined. Ah, crap.